And today I'm going to demonstrate the entry of supplies, the entry of animals, and our procedures for microbiological monitoring. So first I'll get started with personal protective equipment. We always want to make sure that we have on a smock of some sort with our arms covered, chemical resistant gloves, and splash goggles. The first thing that I'm going to do is attach a cylinder. So this way we're going to be entering supplies, so that way when our animals get here, our isolator is stocked and ready to go. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to take a look at our port, and we want to look and make sure that our inside cap has a nice bubble on it. So that way we know that the last time we sterilized this cap and we used our atomizer to create pressure, that the pressure is still there and we don't have any holes. So if we did have holes, that inside cap would be sunken in. So we also want to look at our bands. We use 2 rubber bands, and the bands are placed one on top of another and no twists. So since everything there looks good, we can then go and look at our cylinder. So each of our cylinders, they have 3 indicators that they have been sterilized properly. The first is this autoclavable tape. The tape, these strips here first start out white, so once they've been autoclaved, they turn black. And then right in the front here, and it's dropped off, but we have a stera gauge. And these down here start off white and have turned black, so we know that this has been sterilized properly. Within the cylinder, within either a bag of bedding or a bag of feed, we're going to have another sterilization indicator that once we pull the supplies into the isolator, we're going to check and make sure that everything has been sterilized properly. So all of our visuals for now look good. Now we can take a look at our cylinder, and we want to look at this filter media and make sure that the filter media does not have any tears, punctures. Just make sure that all underneath everything is good. And then we want to look at our mylar here and make sure that we don't find any holes. A lot of times if you do find holes, it seems to be really close to the edge here. And sometimes just tilting it up towards the light, you can see a little bit better than rather if you just have it flat on the table in front of you. And then also you want to make sure that this mylar doesn't extend beyond your tape. If it does, that could potentially create a channel of entry for air to seep through and into your cylinder. So once you've checked and everything looks okay, then we can go ahead and pop off our cap here. Now I already have some plugs that are soaking in our sterilant. And you want to make sure that you check your plugs, no holes, no cracks. And if you do find holes or cracks, you want to throw them out and get new. So the first thing we do is spray our inside port. You want to make sure that you're directing that spray around the periphery. We don't like to leave our ports open for any longer than 15 minutes. And now we can go ahead and, using the same sterilant, we can swab our port. And all along the face of the inside cap. Run it all around the inside. And then we like to go about 3 inches along the outer part here. And then along this face of this ridge. Now our sleeve, we've already checked to make sure that there weren't any holes, and the best way to do this is to hold this sleeve, fogging up, to hold this sleeve up to the light. And that's the easiest way to locate any holes. And usually once you've begun to use a sleeve, the first place that you seem to get holes are right where they're either have been resting on the port or resting on the cylinder. That's a very common place. or where this Taconic tube attaches in the seams. So this one we already checked out and it's ready to go. So because we're going to be spraying in water, I'm only going to swab half of it. And that's just to hopefully keep our sleeves from getting too wet. Swab in our Taconic tube. Okay. We'll place this on our port. Now we secure these to our port using a clamp and band. You can also use the 2-inch vinyl tape by drying off the sleeve, and we usually go around 1.5 to 2 times, making sure that there aren't any channels of entry for the air to come through. But tape, especially on a port, can be very difficult, so these clamps are really handy. So next, we're going to add our water. And now our water we know has been autoclaved because this top here is sunken in. So we use these special tops that prior to autoclaving, they're popped out. So once they have been autoclaved, the top sinks in, and that way we know it's been autoclaved properly. And another thing that you can do is you can kind of tilt your bottle sideways. And as long as you don't see any air bubbles continuously moving up the bottle, you know that there aren't any pinholes anywhere. So this one is good to go. And we spray the top, and then you also want to direct your spray up under the lip here, and then get all along the sides of your bottle. And then finish off at the bottom. Place this in our port. And I usually place it so the neck is facing in, it's easier to grab. And then we can finish swabbing the other half of our sleeve.
Regular Bidox?
Today we're actually just using water with a soapy mixture,
Oh, okay.
but we use export.
Okay.
Two. And then we can swab our cylinder. And like to come out onto the cylinder beyond the tape about 1 inch and go all the way around, and then do the face of our cylinder. And now we use another clamp and band to attach the sleeve to the cylinder. And again, the 2-inch tape can be used, but this is just a lot quicker. Okay. I try to make sure that our sleeve is pulled on beyond the end of our tape here. And you want to make sure there's a seam over on this other side here. You want to make sure that that's lined up as best as possible. So you don't want to have any twists in your sleeve. It just makes it easier to get your supplies in and out. That's better. Pull on our band and put our clamp into place. Okay. Now we move up our cart so it's flush with our isolator. Pull this back. Okay. Now we're ready to use our atomizer. creates a nice fine mist, and it also is creating pressure within the sleeve. And because we're dealing with so much plastic and the mylar on the cylinder, we're going to know if we have a hole, because this is nice and filled with pressure, and we have we use a 20-minute wait time for our sterilant. And so within that 20 minutes, if there's a hole, you'll know, because right now we have a nice little protruding bubble on the cap, and if there is a hole, that will be sunken in. And then we also will use an Isolator activity record, and that's where we log the date and the time. We have a large facility, so we have many different carts, many different clocks, the autoclave information for our cylinder and our water, and that way if we have a break down the road, we can come back to this and look and see if we're having maybe multiple breaks, if we can, you know, discover a trend in the brakes, and, you know, maybe we use the same cart on all the isolators. So every time we close this port, the information's logged on here. Okay, so again, our wait time is 20 minutes for today. We won't wait the entire 20 minutes. Okay, so I'm just gonna hop into the isolator, and now, every time I enter an isolator, it's always good practice to check your gloves, because you never know. So it's always good to look at all of the fingers, up and down, in between, and you never know. Even though you are wearing your canvas gloves, you never know if that, when you're handling a mouse, if for some reason a tooth might have gone through. So it's always a good practice to, before you even get started, look at your gloves, look up your sleeves. Lots of times it's easier to look at your sleeves outside of the isolator. It's always good practice weekly. Pull your fingers inside out and take a peek from the outside of the isolator. So that way, once you get started, if you do have a hole, you can get it patched immediately, and you aren't in here moving around and changing the pressure within the isolator, and you have a hole. So that way you can get everything sealed up if you do find something. So we're ready to go. So we'll put on our canvas gloves. I recommend always having these on unless you're actually checking your gloves or swabbing your fingers. No, they're just a typical canvas glove, and these actually, they just have, yep, and these just have the little grippers on it. Makes it easier when you're handling the water bottles. They can be kind of slippery once they've gotten wet. All right, so once your sterilant contact time has elapsed, and you see that you still have a nice bubble here, so we know we don't have any holes, you can go ahead and open your port. And at this time, if you want to go ahead and pop the seal on your water bottle just to release the pressure, that helps. So now I need a volunteer to move this cylinder up towards me. So the whole thing just gets, just push it right up. Yes, thank you. So this can be done alone, but it's not recommended because it's very difficult. So once it's moved up, go ahead and reach in and pop the mylar. Okay, you can go ahead and grab it. And I should have told you to stay there because now I need someone to pull it back for me. So we keep all of our supplies in a mesh bag with this string, so it's just easy to, you can go ahead, pull it on back. So it's a little bit easier to get them all in. Prior to the mesh bag, you would just have to sit here and have somebody shake the end of your cylinder and shake everything in. There is a tray in here, but the tray, we don't slide back and forth through the sleeve, so we just use the bags. Okay, so within your cylinder, there's going to be the test bag. And the test bag has the autoclave tape. It's usually marked with an X. And in here's going to be our Gauge. It's usually placed down in towards the center of the bag. And you want to make sure that it's dark in color all the way across into the accept range. If it was reject, you'd want to take all of the supplies that were just entered in from your cylinder and immediately exit them back out of the isolator. If this was rejected, there is a chance that your isolator was compromised, so we would place the isolator on detainment, so which would usually mean no sale of animals, or until we've made sure that there's no new contaminants identified. So once everything's acceptable, we can go ahead and put our supplies away. Out of the way. Okay. All right, so next I'm going to show you how we take samples for the microbiological monitoring. So I'm just gonna put my cap back on my port. And since it was off, every time the cap comes off, I always like to check it for holes just in case. Always make sure that you're looking around the seams. It's one of the most common places for a hole. Seams split. There's a pretty good chance, because we had a nice bubble, that there isn't a hole, but you never know when maybe your rubber band was covering up the hole. And then we look along the face of it and make sure we don't have any. This looks good, and place this back on. And now you can really see what the cap looks like when it's sunken in. So big difference. So for the microbiological monitoring, we are using these little glass culture tubes with swabs. For this, we only need 2 swabs. And what we're doing is, for each of the cages that contain animals, we take 2 pieces of the dirty bedding, and then we'll take 2 pieces of fecal pellets. Now, often when you're in a dirty cage, it's hard to tell what's fresh and what's been there for a while. So lots of times, if we're using another cage to hold the animals while we're cleaning that cage, I'll just select my fecal pellets from there, so that way we know that they're fresh. I'll moisten swabs. And from in the cage, swab the floors, swab the cage top, the feed, the water bottle goes in, the animals before they go back into the cage. And then within the isolator, we swab the filter outlets here. And then we'll also remove our gloves, and I'll swab all of the fingers. And then around our seams. in here. And lots of times right here where these rings are, bedding will get stuck. So this is a good way to kind of get it cleaned out, because oftentimes this seems to be the worst spot for getting holes, because the bedding will sit there and it will poke right through. So with this, at least with this, you're kind of getting it cleaned out a little bit. And then I'll just swab some of our packages that we just brought in and some of the water bottles. And then lastly, the floor, and you want to take care not to get any sterilant on it. Lots of times when you just pulled in a cylinder, there'll be some sterilant puddled up there. So just make sure that you're avoiding that. And you can go ahead and stick this in. Now, we will put water from the bottles that have been on the cages with the animals for a minimum of a day. So we'll just go through however many cages we have, and we'll just put in a few drops from each of the bottles, and normally we'll end up filling the culture tube up to there. And by that point in time, when you've finished up your culture tube, most of your cages have been cleaned. We clean into the, because we don't do complete cage changes, these cages always stay in here, so we'll place all of the refuse into a paper bag, and so then the paper bag with the refuse, it will get exited. And we'll just fill up with our fresh water. Any dirty water can just be poured right into one of these and exit that out too. So any refuse will just send right back out. And you want to try to get it all out now, so you're not doing multiple entries in and out. So try to keep this to a minimum. And then again, I just check my cap, but because my cap's off again, just out of habit, I check it again. You never know. So now we should have our isolator fully stocked with supplies and ready to receive animals. So I'm just going to unhook this, and then we're going to hook up a germ-free shipper. Okay, now we have our germ-free shipper. So normally the shipper, when it arrives to you, we actually have this end has been sterilized, and this is taped up and kind of placed up there. So this, I already removed the tape. So this shipper here, before we hook up, I always like to give it a look over. And so here where the animals are, this is all sterile, and we want to make sure that we don't have any holes where the animals could possibly be compromised. As long as nothing is found, we're good to go. Now here, again, we don't want any holes, but if for some reason we do find a hole, or you just find a bend in the plastic or something that doesn't look good, you can always use a pool patch to patch this, because you're going to do the sterilization as we hook up, which these are our pool patches that we use. And we use these on shippers, on the isolator itself. These are great. They're water resistant, so they work really well. Okay, so once we've determined that our shipper is ready to go, put it up here. It's very similar to our cylinder. Now, if you have any debris that's in the port, what we recommend is just spraying a paper towel with some sterilant and then wiping out your port, just to get any bedding out of the way, or debris that might be in there. So again, we'll spray our port, directing our spray towards the periphery, and then sprayer towel and clean out our port and spray again. And then we will swab our port along the face of the inside cap, all around the inside, and then up 3 inches around the outside, and then along face here. Now, germ-free shippers usually have a pretty long sleeve, so I always like to spray some sterilant in here. And then we're going to swab the inside, taking much care around this Mylar film here. And go through our sleeve. Now this can be the difficult part because, let's get our band on here. Once we get this sleeve on, we need to fit that end of this atomizer into our sleeve, and sometimes it just doesn't want to go. Yes. We'll usually have, you know, as technicians are going through the building, like, hey, can you help me with my cylinder? But yep, all of this is usually just one. Okay, get this ready. So this is the difficult part. Trying to do this without losing your sleeve right off of the port. Take our atomizer here, and you have to lift up on your sleeve and get the top of get your atomizer in here. Try to slide your band up without losing your sleeve. Thank you. Okay, we got it. Oftentimes, if you get a little bit too much pressure, the sleeve will just fly right off, and it is hard to get this in here. So once we have this attached, again, for us, we have a sterilant contact time of 20 minutes. This ring here is cardboard, so when we're actually packing the shipper, we like to make sure that this is elevated so the sterilant isn't sitting here along the cardboard ring. But most times when you're receiving, you're not going to be reusing this shipper, so if the cardboard ring gets a little wet, it really doesn't matter. So. Now, I've heard 2 ways of entry of the animals. Some people just burst the Mylar ring with a pair of forceps, while others untape it and take the entire Mylar ring into the isolator. So what we're used to doing, because we're packing them, it gets untaped and the entire Mylar ring comes into the isolator. But yeah, some do pop the ring. Yeah. All right, so again, our 20-minute wait time. And here again, and this, sometimes it'll take multiple sprays because of the way the atomizer is. We've actually come up with an end piece, which is a long tube, and the tube fits much easier into the end. Of course, I asked if I could use it today, and no, we need that, so. So they're gonna leave me to struggle. So once our 20-minute wait time has elapsed, and again, when we're spraying these, we want to make sure that there is a bubble so we know that there isn't a hole somewhere, and 20 minutes goes by, we still have a nice bubble. You can go ahead and pop off your inside cap. And now for these, if you're going to pop the Mylar, then you could have someone push that up. Or if you want to untape, we could show you how to do that too. And just around and around, and this entire Mylar disc will be sent into the isolator. Many wraps of tape. Okay. Go. And sometimes there we go, that went in nice and easy. Sometimes you might put a little dig in the tape, but that's okay. And then when you're ready to send your animals in, you can just slide the cages around. And this will have already been, let's see if I can push it in out of the way, already in your isolator. Slide our cage up. Pull this in. Bring in our animals, and then we can just unpack our animals and get them placed into cages, and we're ready to go. And then all of this, we just exit back out of the isolator. And now when we're packing these, this Mylar disc goes back out, and then we retape to make sure it doesn't move. And it's usually a set of usually nine times around to make sure that the disc doesn't move. And it doesn't move. We certainly tape them into place. So yep, so then we'll just send this right back out. And then we can check our inside cap over again, make sure we don't find any holes. Another thing I'd like to show you is our mold trap. The mold traps are typically used when the isolator is going through its series of testing prior to animals being entered. But this is something that you could also use once you have entered animals to make sure that there's no mold within the isolator. Usually take our 2 cages and we'll just put a paper towel along the bottom so the feed doesn't. Sometimes it might get dried up a little bit in areas and sticks to the cages. And place some feed in here, which would yes. Fill this up with some feed and water. Lots of water. The key is just some water. You always want to keep this feed moist. And For the initial testing process, we keep some of the swabs in here. And that way, as it's tested, they'll take the swabs out and use them within the weekly culture tubes for the monitoring. And we'll put about 5 in each. And so we want to check this, always make sure that the feed's nice and moist, and then next week when we come to take our culture, we'll take a little bit out of here and place that in our culture tube and send it to our lab for testing. And I mean, most times if there's something growing, you see it. It's visible.
You said about take a little bit out. You mean a little bit of the food out, a little bit of the swab?
Yeah, we'll take a little bit of the feed out, and we'll take the swabs from within here. Yep, we'll place the feed, the moistened feed, right in the culture tube. But again, if there's something in here, you can see it. There's be something green and fuzzy growing. Then the last thing is just our weekly isolator check. You want to make sure that the isolator doesn't have any holes. So again, we're always looking at the fingers, in between all of the fingers, up the sleeves, inside cap. When the cap is off, you want to check your port. Make sure you don't feel any rough burrs on the port, because that can be a source of holes in your cap. Is just a little piece of the plastic might have chipped off. The main source of holes and are seam splits. That's usually what ends up happening. Or under here where this ring is and the bedding gets stuck, a lot of times the bedding will poke through here. So on this one we reinforced with some pool patches. We just said, you know what, just in case, we're putting some pool patches on there, and then we just retaped over with some of the white tape around. Seams, what we do normally do if we find a hole, pool patch, and then reinforce with the yellow tape. Now again, if the animals are in here, we'll usually place the isolators on what we call a 3-week detainment. So usually there won't be any sales or shipments out of the isolator for a period of 3 weeks, so we can determine if if it has picked up any contaminants. Once the isolator is clear with a seam split or even a hole in the glove, transfer into a new isolator. Seam splits especially, it seems like once they get started, they just want to keep going. So reinforce with the yellow tape, and then once you know you're clear, no new contaminants, get into a new isolator.